I discovered that my son had already buried me long before I was ever close to dying. The photograph showed me asleep in a hospital bed, my gray hair spread across the pillow, an oxygen tube beneath my nose. Above it, my son Michael had written that I was battling terminal cancer, and that our family desperately needed help to save my life. By the time I saw the page, strangers had donated more than $180,000. There was only one problem. I didn't have cancer. My doctor had told me 3 days earlier that my heart condition was manageable and that I would likely live many more years. Yet thousands of people were praying for my final days while my own son accepted their money. As I stared at my own face on that screen, I made a decision. If Michael wanted to profit from my illness, I would spend the rest of my life returning every dollar he had taken. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like this video. It helps stories like mine reach people who may need them. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you forgive your own child in this situation? Please subscribe and stay with me until the end. Because what happened to my family changed all of our lives. And before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always read your comments, and knowing that people around the world are listening makes me feel a little less alone. After my husband Thomas died, people kept telling me that time would make everything easier. They were wrong. Time doesn't make grief smaller. It simply teaches you how to carry it without collapsing in public. Thomas and I had been married for 42 years. We met in the fall of 1974 at a church picnic outside Columbus, Ohio. He was tall, quiet, and had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. I was 20 years old and working part-time at the public library while attending college classes at night. He asked me to dance even though there wasn't any music playing. That was Thomas. He never waited for perfect circumstances. By the time we married, we had very little money. He worked as an electrician while I eventually became a high school librarian. We bought a small brick house on Maple Street, planted 2 maple trees in the yard, and built our life one paycheck at a time. And then Michael arrived. My only child. For years, I believed I had been blessed with the perfect son. Michael had Thomas's dark hair and my stubborn personality. As a boy, he followed his father everywhere. He sat beside Thomas in the garage while repairs were being made. He helped me shelve books when I brought work home. He hugged me every night before bed. When he was 10 years old, he made me a Mother's Day card that said, "Mom, if you ever get old, I'll always take care of you." I kept that card in my dresser for over 30 years. Back then, I believed every word. Thomas and I worked hard to give Michael opportunities we never had. There were years when money became tight. I worked extra shifts during the summer. Thomas took emergency electrical jobs on weekends. When Michael wanted to attend Ohio State University, we emptied much of our savings, and we were proud to do it. The day he graduated, Thomas cried openly. "My boy made it," he kept saying. For a while, life seemed to reward all those sacrifices. Michael found work in marketing. He was charming, intelligent, and ambitious. He moved to Cincinnati for several years and eventually returned to Columbus when a new company hired him. That was when he met Jennifer. At first, I liked her. She was beautiful, confident, and energetic. She talked quickly and always seemed excited about something. She worked in retail management and had dreams of owning her own business one day. Thomas liked her too. He said she brought Michael out of his shell. They married 2 years later. Then, Olivia was born. My granddaughter became the brightest light in our family. Thomas adored her. He taught her how to fish. He bought her ice cream every Saturday afternoon. She sat beside him during football games, even though she didn't understand the rules. Those were the years I still think about when I cannot sleep. Because families never imagine the day they begin falling apart. Thomas suffered his stroke on a cold February morning. One minute, he was drinking coffee at the kitchen table. The next minute, he was on the floor. He died 3 days later. The silence that followed nearly destroyed me. For months, I continued setting 2 coffee cups on the counter every morning. I still reached across the bed in the middle of the night. I still expected to hear his truck pulling into the driveway. Michael helped me during those early months. He mowed my lawn. He repaired things around the house. He called every evening. Sometimes he simply sat beside me in silence. I remember telling Patricia, my best friend, that I didn't know what I would do without my son. But slowly, something changed. At first, it seemed small. Michael lost his job during company layoffs. He found another position, but that company closed. Then a freelance contract ended. Then another opportunity disappeared. Every conversation began to revolve around money. The economy is terrible. Nobody appreciates experience. You have to know people to get ahead. I understood his frustrations. Life can be unfair. But bitterness began replacing the warmth I once knew. He became impatient, short-tempered, restless. Jennifer also changed. Or perhaps I simply noticed things I had ignored before. She became obsessed with appearances. There were always expensive vacations posted online. New furniture, designer handbags, restaurants that seemed far beyond their budget. I once asked Michael if things were financially difficult. He smiled and said, "We're managing." Yet I noticed credit card bills sitting unopened on their kitchen counter. I heard arguments behind closed doors. Jennifer often spoke about people who had larger homes or better cars. "We deserve more," she said one evening while Olivia sat quietly at the dinner table. Michael nodded. That sentence stayed with me. We deserve more. Thomas and I had never used those words. We believed you earned more. One Christmas, about 3 years after Thomas died, Michael came to my house looking exhausted. He sat at my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. "I feel like I've failed everyone," he admitted. I reached across and took his hand. "You haven't failed anyone." He stared into his coffee. "Dad would be disappointed." "No," I said firmly. "Your father loved you." But Michael only shook his head. Looking back now, I think that conversation revealed something important. He had begun measuring his worth by money, by success, by appearances. And every year, he felt himself falling further behind. Meanwhile, I continued living quietly. My pension covered my expenses. I volunteered at the library twice a week. I gardened. I attended church. I spent time with Olivia. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable. Perhaps that stability eventually became something Michael resented. I didn't realize it then. I thought he simply needed time. One afternoon, Patricia asked me if I was worried about him. I remember laughing. "Michael would never let me down." She smiled, but didn't answer. Patricia had known our family for over 30 years. Sometimes, friends see things we refuse to acknowledge. As months passed, Michael became more distant. Calls became less frequent. Visits became shorter. Jennifer often complained about bills. Olivia seemed quieter every time I saw her. And yet, whenever Michael hugged me goodbye, I still saw the little boy who promised to take care of me when I became old. That promise remained alive inside me. Perhaps mothers never stop believing in the children they once knew, even when those children become strangers. I had no idea that while I was mourning my husband and growing older, my son was carrying a different kind of pain, a dangerous pain. The kind that grows quietly, the kind that tells a person they deserve something life hasn't given them. And somewhere along the way, Michael Cooper stopped seeing me as his mother. He began seeing me as his last opportunity. At the time, I didn't know any of that. I only knew that my son seemed tired, lost. And when I collapsed in my garden several months later, Michael rushed to the hospital faster than anyone else. I thought it was because he loved me. I never imagined he was already looking at my hospital bed and seeing something entirely different, something that could change all of our lives. The morning I collapsed in my garden began like hundreds of mornings before it. I woke just after 6, made a cup of coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunlight fall across the backyard. The maple trees Thomas had planted decades earlier were beginning to lose their leaves, and the air carried that familiar Ohio chill that always reminded me that winter was coming. I remember thinking how quiet the house had become. There was no television playing in the living room. No sound of Thomas reading the newspaper. Only the ticking clock above the stove. After breakfast, I walked outside to trim several dying flowers beside the fence. Gardening had become my therapy after Thomas passed away. The work kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. I had been bending over for several minutes when I suddenly felt dizzy. The world shifted. The fence seemed to move. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought I simply needed to sit down. Then everything became dark. The next thing I remember was Patricia's frightened voice. "Sandra? Sandra, can you hear me?" She had been walking her dog and found me lying beside the flower bed. The ambulance arrived quickly. I remember the flashing lights, the cold air, the questions from the paramedics. And somewhere in the confusion, I heard Patricia calling Michael. By the time I arrived at Riverside Hospital, Michael was already there. He rushed into the emergency room, looking terrified. His face was pale. His eyes were red. For the first time in many months, I saw the little boy I used to know. "Mom, you scared me to death." He held my hand tightly. Jennifer arrived shortly afterward. She hugged me carefully. Olivia came later that evening carrying a small bouquet of flowers. For a brief moment, I felt surrounded by my family again. And honestly, I needed that. Losing consciousness at 67 years old forces you to confront uncomfortable thoughts. You wonder whether your body is beginning to fail. You wonder whether your life is becoming smaller. You wonder how much time remains. The emergency physicians ran several tests: blood work, electrocardiograms, scans. The doctors admitted me overnight for observation. Michael stayed long after visiting hours. He sat beside my bed, scrolling through his phone while occasionally asking the nurses questions. At first, I thought his concern was touching. He wanted every detail, every update, every explanation. The next morning, Dr. Richard Bennett entered my room. He was a calm man in his early 60s who had treated me before. He pulled a chair beside my bed. "Sandra, I have good news." I immediately relaxed. He explained that I had experienced a mild cardiac episode caused by an irregular heartbeat combined with anemia and exhaustion. My blood pressure had dropped. My iron levels were low. The stress and lack of proper rest had contributed to the collapse. "Do I have heart disease?" I asked. "You have a manageable heart condition," he said gently. "Nothing life-threatening at this point." "And cancer?" He smiled. "No cancer." I don't know why I asked that question. Perhaps at my age, serious illness always feels close enough to imagine, but Dr. Bennett was very clear. There was no cancer, no tumors, no terminal diagnosis, no immediate danger. I would need medication, diet changes, follow-up appointments, and more rest. When Michael entered the room later, I shared the doctor's news. "You hear that?" I said with a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." For a second, his expression seemed difficult to read. Relief never fully appeared. Instead, he simply nodded. "That's good, Mom." Then he asked something strange. "Did they give you copies of the test results?" I looked at him. "Why, I just think it's good to keep everything organized." That seemed reasonable. After all, he had always handled paperwork better than I did. The following day, he asked another question. "Can I speak with the doctor?" Of course. He spent nearly 20 minutes with Dr. Bennett in the hallway. When he returned, he looked thoughtful. I assumed he was worried. I didn't know what they discussed. Later that evening, Jennifer visited alone. She sat beside my bed, scrolling through social media while we talked. At one point, she said, "People really don't realize how expensive healthcare is." I laughed softly. Thankfully, Medicare covers most of mine. She looked disappointed. "Still, unexpected expenses happen." I didn't understand why she seemed so focused on money. I had been hospitalized for barely 2 days. But I dismissed the feeling. When people are frightened, they say strange things. On the third morning, Michael entered my room carrying coffee. He seemed more cheerful. He asked if he could take a photograph of me to show Olivia's school counselor because Olivia was worried about me. The request felt harmless. I was tired. My hair was messy. An oxygen tube rested beneath my nose. "I look awful," I told him. "You look like my mom." So I allowed it. He took several photographs, one from beside the bed, another while I was resting, one while I appeared asleep. I remember laughing. "You'd better delete those before anyone sees them." He smiled. "I will." That memory would later replay in my mind hundreds of times. Every angle, every second, every word. Because the photograph that eventually appeared online was taken that day. At the time, I had no reason to suspect anything. Michael continued visiting. He brought magazines. He asked questions about medications. He checked on insurance paperwork. He spoke with nurses. He even requested copies of some discharge documents because he said he wanted to help keep everything organized. The nurses gladly cooperated. After all, he was my son. And he looked concerned, very concerned. When Patricia visited, she said something that stayed with me. "Michael seems nervous." "He's worried," I replied. She tilted her head. "No, worried is different." "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Something feels off." I immediately defended him. "He's been through a lot." She nodded. "I know." But Patricia said nothing else. 2 days later, Dr. Bennett discharged me. Before leaving, he repeated his instructions. Take the medication, rest, reduce stress. Follow up in 2 weeks. He shook my hand. "Sandra, you should have many good years ahead of you." Many good years. Those words brought me enormous comfort. As Michael drove me home, I remember feeling grateful. Grateful for my health. Grateful for my family. Grateful that whatever had happened wasn't serious. The sunlight streamed through the car windows. Michael asked several more questions. "What exactly did the doctor say? Did he mention future complications? Could your condition become worse?" I answered honestly. "He said everything is manageable." Michael stared at the road. "And if it isn't," I laughed softly, "then I'll deal with it." He didn't answer. When we arrived at my house, he carried my bags inside. Before leaving, he hugged me tightly, longer than usual. His voice sounded strange. "Take care of yourself, Mom." I kissed his cheek. "You too." As he walked toward his car, I noticed him looking back at the house. His expression wasn't sadness. It wasn't relief. It was something else. Something I couldn't understand. At the time, I believed my son was simply afraid of losing me. I never imagined he was already carrying copies of my hospital records. He already had photographs. He already knew the truth. And somehow, despite knowing that I was not dying, my son had begun building a story in which I already was. For nearly a week after leaving the hospital, I tried to return to my normal life. Dr. Bennett had instructed me to rest, so I spent most mornings reading in the living room or sitting on the back porch with a blanket over my legs. Patricia checked on me almost every day. Olivia called several times after school. Even Michael visited twice, bringing groceries and insisting that I avoid heavy work. Looking back, those visits seemed different now. At the time, I saw a caring son. Now I wonder if he was watching a story he had already written. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday. It had been raining since dawn. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea when my phone rang. It was Patricia. Her voice sounded strange. "Sandra, are you sitting down?" I laughed. "I'm 67. I'm always sitting down." She didn't laugh. "There's something you need to see." A few minutes later, she arrived carrying her tablet. Her face looked pale. She sat across from me without speaking. "What is it?" I asked. She slowly turned the screen toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach dropped. There I was, my hospital bed, my oxygen tube, my eyes closed, the photograph Michael had taken. Above the picture appeared the words, "Help save my mother's life." My hands immediately began shaking. Below the title was Michael's photograph, and beneath it, a story. My son had written, "My mother, Sandra Cooper, has been diagnosed with aggressive cancer. Doctors have told us her condition is very serious. She is fighting for her life, and our family is overwhelmed by medical expenses. We are asking for prayers and support during this heartbreaking time." I stared at the screen. I couldn't breathe. Patricia reached for my hand. "Sandra." But I wasn't listening. I kept reading. "She has always helped everyone around her, and now she needs help herself. Every donation will help cover treatments, medications, and end-of-life care." End-of-life care. The words blurred. I felt cold. Not because I believed them, because my son had written them. My own son. At the top of the page, a number appeared. $183,462, raised in 21 days. Over 3,000 donations. Thousands. I looked up at Patricia. "This can't be real." She nodded slowly. "I wish it wasn't." My heart began pounding. I scrolled downward. Hundreds of comments. Thousands. People praying for me. People crying for me. People sharing their own stories. One woman wrote, "I lost my mother to cancer last year. I'm praying for Sandra." Another said, "My husband is fighting cancer right now. Sending love." A retired teacher had donated $50. A church group had donated several hundred. Someone from Texas wrote, "No one should fight cancer alone." I felt physically sick. These people believed I was dying, and Michael had allowed them to believe it. No. He had asked them to believe it. Patricia quietly said, "I found it yesterday." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to make sure." I kept scrolling. There were additional photographs. One showed me sleeping. Another showed my hospital wristband. One even showed my medication sitting beside the bed. Michael had written updates. "Mom had a difficult night. Doctors are discussing treatment options. Please continue praying." The dates matched the days I had been recovering at home. While I was sitting on my porch drinking tea, strangers believed I was fighting for my life. I felt betrayed in a way I cannot fully describe. People often imagine betrayal as anger. But the first feeling is confusion. Your mind refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. I remember saying aloud, "Why would he do this?" Patricia didn't answer, because neither of us knew. Then I noticed something else. Michael had posted several videos. I clicked one. His face appeared on the screen. He looked exhausted. His eyes appeared red. He spoke softly. "My mom is the strongest woman I know. Watching her suffer has been devastating." I almost dropped the tablet. He cried, actually cried. Thousands of people had watched it. Many had commented. Many had donated after seeing it. I felt as though I were watching a stranger wearing my son's face. Because the Michael I raised could not possibly do this, could he? My eyes moved back to the total. $183,000. I knew immediately that this wasn't a misunderstanding. No one accidentally raises that amount of money. No one accidentally tells thousands of people that their mother is dying. Patricia asked quietly, "Have you spoken to him?" I shook my head. "No." "What are you going to do?" I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. Part of me wanted to call him immediately. Part of me wanted to believe there had been some terrible mistake. But another part of me already knew the truth. This had taken planning. The photographs, the updates, the videos, the emotional messages, the bank account, all of it. I returned to the comments. One message caught my attention. A woman wrote, "My cancer treatments forced me into bankruptcy. I can only send $20, but I hope it helps." $20. Perhaps that woman had less money than I did, yet she had given it because she believed I needed help. My eyes filled with tears, not because of the money, because of the kindness. People I had never met cared more about my suffering than my own son respected it. Suddenly, I remembered something. Michael had asked several times about my medical records, the photographs, the doctor's statements, the questions about future complications. The pieces began fitting together, and that realization hurt more than the campaign itself, because it meant this had started inside the hospital. While I was frightened, while I trusted him, while I believed he was protecting me. Patricia finally said, "You need answers?" I nodded. "Yes." But another thought entered my mind. What if the money is gone? Neither of us spoke, because both of us knew that possibility existed. I looked again at the number. $183,000. More money than Michael had earned in years. I thought about Jennifer's expensive tastes, their financial problems, the arguments, the pressure. Suddenly, everything felt connected. The rain continued outside. The kitchen seemed darker. And then I noticed something at the bottom of the page. Michael had written one final sentence. "Please don't tell my mother how serious her condition is. We're trying to keep her spirits up while we still have time." I stared at those words for a very long time. While we still have time. My son had told thousands of strangers that I was dying. He had taken away my future, my hope, my dignity. He had buried me publicly while I was still alive. And sitting there in my kitchen, looking at my own face on that screen, I realized something terrifying. I no longer knew my son, but I intended to find out exactly who he had become. I did not sleep the night after Patricia showed me the fundraising page. I sat in my living room with the lights turned off, watching the glow from my laptop screen. Every few minutes, I refreshed the page. The donations continued. $30, $100, $20, $200. The total climbed while I sat there very much alive. I read every comment, every prayer, every message from strangers who believed they were helping a dying woman. Around midnight, I found a donation from a woman named Karen. She had written, My mother passed away from cancer last year. I only have $25 to spare, but I hope this helps. $25. Some people gave hundreds. Others gave 10. But every dollar carried trust. And my son had taken that trust. I looked at the family photographs sitting beside my fireplace. Michael at age 8. Michael at his graduation. Michael holding Olivia as a baby. The faces in those photographs seemed to belong to someone else. By morning, I had made a decision. I would talk to him face to face. No accusations over the phone. No angry messages. No public scene. I wanted to look into my son's eyes when he explained why he had buried me before I was dead. At 10 o'clock, I called him. "Michael, can you come over?" His voice sounded normal. "Sure. Is everything okay?" "No." A long silence followed. "I'll be there soon." An hour later, his SUV pulled into my driveway. I noticed the vehicle immediately. It was newer than the one he had owned only months earlier. Shiny black paint, large wheels. It looked expensive. I tried not to think about it. Michael walked inside carrying a bag of groceries. "I brought soup." I stood in the kitchen holding my phone. "Sit down." He looked at my face. Something changed in his expression. He slowly placed the groceries on the counter. "Mom." I opened the fundraising page. Without saying a word, I turned the phone toward him. The color disappeared from his face. For several seconds, he said absolutely nothing. I had never seen my son speechless before. Finally, he asked, "Who showed you this?" Patricia's name almost escaped my lips, but I stopped myself. "That doesn't matter." He rubbed his forehead. "Mom." "No." My voice surprised both of us. "No. You answer my questions." He sat down. I remained standing. "Were you going to tell me—" He looked away. "It's complicated." "No, Michael. It's very simple." He still wouldn't look at me. "People wanted to help. You told people I have cancer." He swallowed. "I know. I don't have cancer. I know." Those words hit me harder than I expected. I know. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. He knew. The entire time. I sat across from him. "Why?" He took a deep breath. "You collapsed. The doctors weren't sure what was wrong at first. But they became sure. Mom, they told us I was going to be fine." "I know." "Then why—" He finally met my eyes. "I was scared." "Scared of what? Losing you?" I almost believed him. Almost. Because fear can make people do foolish things. But then he said something else. "I thought maybe we'd need money later." I stared at him. "What? If your condition got worse?" "So you told people I was dying." He ran his hands through his hair. "I exaggerated." The word hung in the air. Exaggerated. As if terminal cancer were an inconvenience. As if thousands of people had donated because he had stretched the truth a little. "You told them I was receiving treatment." He said nothing. "You told them I had only months to live." Silence. "You told them not to tell me because I didn't know how serious my condition was." Still silence. Tears began forming in my eyes. "Michael, you buried me." At that moment, the front door opened. Jennifer walked inside. She immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on?" I turned the phone toward her. She looked at the screen. And unlike Michael, she did not seem shocked. That frightened me, because it meant she already knew everything. Jennifer sighed. "Sandra, this isn't what you think." I looked at her. Then explain it. She sat beside Michael. The healthcare system is expensive. I don't have cancer. We know. Then why tell people that I do? Jennifer crossed her arms. People donate when situations are serious. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Michael stared at the floor. Jennifer continued. We weren't trying to hurt you. Then what were you trying to do? She hesitated. Protect the family. The family? I suddenly realized that neither of them had mentioned the donors. Not once. Not the widow who donated $25. Not the people praying. Not the strangers sacrificing money. Only themselves. Only their problems. Only their needs. I looked at Michael. How much of the money is left? His silence answered before his words did. My stomach dropped. Michael. He finally whispered, some of it. How much? Jennifer spoke first. We've had expenses. What expenses? Bills. I looked out the window. The black SUV sat in the driveway. The expensive vehicle. The vacations Jennifer posted online. The home renovations. My mind suddenly connected dozens of things I had ignored. You spent it. Michael stood. Mom. You spent money people gave because they thought I was dying. His voice grew louder. You don't understand what we've been through. And they do. We've struggled for years. So you used me. No. Then what did you do? For the first time, Michael became angry. Really angry. You have no idea what it's like. I stared at him. What? You have your house. My husband died. You have your pension. I worked for it. You have savings. I earned them. He slammed his hand against the table. You don't know what it's like to fail. The room became silent, because suddenly this was no longer about my illness. This was about his life, his disappointments, his resentment, and perhaps something much darker. I spoke quietly. You think I owe you. His eyes widened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Jennifer stood beside him. We only wanted some security. By telling people I was dying, Michael's voice softened. I was going to stop it. When, I don't know. When I actually die. He looked away. I felt something inside me break. Not anger, not even hatred. Something worse. Disappointment. The kind that settles deep inside a mother. I stood and walked toward the front door. You need to leave. Michael looked shocked. Mom, leave. Jennifer grabbed her purse. Michael remained standing. His eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked directly at him. But you did. He hesitated. I love you. My voice trembled. Then why did you make the world believe I was already gone? Neither of them answered. A few moments later, the front door closed. Their car disappeared down the street. The house became quiet again. I sat alone at the kitchen table, and for the first time, another question entered my mind. If nearly $200,000 had already been raised, how much of it had already disappeared? For several days after Michael and Jennifer left my house, I heard nothing from either of them. No phone calls, no text messages, no apologies. The silence somehow hurt more than the argument itself. Part of me expected Michael to return the next morning and tell me that he had made a terrible mistake. I wanted him to say he had closed the fundraiser, contacted the donors, and fixed everything. Instead, the campaign remained online. The total continued rising. By the end of the week, it had passed $187,000. I stopped sleeping well. Every night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the old furnace cycle on and off. Thomas used to say that people revealed their true character when money became involved. At the time, I thought that sounded cynical. Now, I wasn't so sure. Patricia visited almost every afternoon. She brought casseroles, magazines, and enough concern for both of us. One afternoon, she sat across from me and asked quietly, "Have you looked at Jennifer's social media?" I shook my head. "No, you probably should." She handed me her phone. The first photograph showed Jennifer standing beside a swimming pool in Florida. She wore sunglasses and a white summer dress. The caption read, "Sometimes you need to escape and reset." The date caught my attention. It had been posted less than 2 weeks after my hospitalization. I scrolled. Another photograph. Michael sitting behind the wheel of the black SUV. Another. A luxury hotel. Another. An expensive restaurant. Another. Shopping bags. I looked up at Patricia. "When was this?" "Last month." The timing struck me immediately. The fundraiser had already been active. People were donating while my son and daughter-in-law traveled. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. Perhaps the trips had been paid for earlier. Perhaps the vehicle was leased. Perhaps I simply didn't understand. But doubt had begun growing inside me. And doubt once planted spreads quickly. 2 days later, I drove past Michael's house. I told myself I was simply checking on Olivia. That wasn't entirely true. The black SUV sat in the driveway. Workers were replacing part of the front landscaping. Fresh stone borders surrounded the flower beds. The house looked different, improved, expensive. I sat in my car for several minutes. Then I noticed something else. A large television box near the garage. Outdoor furniture. Several unopened packages. My chest tightened. I remembered Michael saying that only some of the money remained. How much had disappeared? 10,000, 50,000 more. I didn't knock. Instead, I drove home. That evening, Olivia called. Her voice sounded unusually quiet. "Grandma?" "Hi, sweetheart. Can I come over this weekend?" "Of course." She hesitated. "Just me." Something about those 2 words worried me. "Are you okay?" "I just want to see you." "You're always welcome." Saturday afternoon, Olivia arrived carrying a backpack. At 16, she had grown nearly as tall as her father. She had Thomas's eyes and his habit of thinking carefully before speaking. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual. I immediately sensed something was wrong. We baked cookies together. We watched an old movie. For several hours, she seemed relaxed, but after dinner, she became quiet again. She sat at the kitchen table staring into her glass of milk. "Grandma?" "Yes." "Are you mad at Dad?" I answered honestly. "I'm hurt." She nodded. "I am too." I waited. Eventually, she began speaking, slowly, carefully, as though each word carried weight. "I knew about the fundraiser." The room became silent. "How long?" She looked down. "A while." My heart sank. "You knew people thought I had cancer." Tears appeared in her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I reached across the table. "Sweetheart, tell me the truth." And she did. She told me about late-night conversations she overheard between her parents. She told me that months before my collapse, money problems had become severe. Credit cards, loans, missed payments, arguments. Jennifer constantly worried about bills. Michael struggled to find stable work. But one sentence changed everything. Olivia whispered, "Dad said people only open their wallets when they're scared." I felt cold. "What do you mean?" She wiped her eyes. "One night, Mom said nobody would donate unless something terrible happened." I said nothing. "He told her that if something happened to you, people would help." Something happened to you. I remembered my collapse, the hospital, the photographs, the questions. Olivia continued speaking. "After you came home, Dad said your heart condition could become serious. Did he believe that?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Then she added something worse. "I heard him say that people care more about dying people." I closed my eyes. For several seconds, I could not speak. Because the terrible possibility I had avoided was becoming real. This had not been a moment of panic, not fear, not confusion. There had been conversations, planning, discussions, calculations. Olivia continued crying. "I told him it was wrong." I looked at her. "You did?" She nodded. "He said I didn't understand adult problems." My throat tightened. "What about your mother?" She looked away. "Mom said everyone asks for help online." "Did she know you were upset?" "Yes." "Did she care?" Olivia's silence answered. I moved beside her and wrapped my arms around her shoulders. She began sobbing. "I should have told you." "No." I lied. "You were scared." She buried her face against me. "I thought you were really sick." That sentence broke my heart, because while strangers believed I was dying, my own granddaughter had also been forced to live inside that lie. A 16-year-old child had carried guilt that should never have belonged to her. After she calmed down, she said something that frightened me even more. "There were spreadsheets." I stared at her. "What?" Dad had numbers. "What numbers?" "Money." I felt my stomach tighten. He and Mom talked about how much they might raise. My voice became quiet. "Before the fundraiser," she nodded. "And after." The room suddenly felt smaller, because now I understood. Michael had not simply reacted to my illness. He had seen opportunity. The thought was almost unbearable. Later that evening, after Olivia had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. Thomas's photograph rested on the mantel. I found myself speaking aloud. "What happened to our son?" There was no answer. Only silence. But another question had begun forming inside me. How many people had sacrificed their own money because they believed I was dying? How many of them needed those dollars more than Michael did? And for the first time, another idea entered my mind. Perhaps this was no longer only about my son. Perhaps it was about every person who had trusted him. Every widow, every veteran, every retiree, every stranger. As I sat there in the darkness, I realized something. I could not undo what Michael had done. I could not make him honest. I could not erase the lies. But perhaps I could still protect the people he had deceived. And somewhere upstairs, Olivia slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Because she had finally told the truth. The truth my son had spent months trying to hide. After Olivia told me the truth, neither of us slept very much. She stayed in the guest bedroom that Thomas had once painted pale blue for visiting family. Long after midnight, I could hear her moving around upstairs. Sometimes the floor creaked softly. Sometimes everything became quiet again. I understood exactly how she felt. Secrets become heavier once they are spoken aloud. The following morning, I found her sitting alone at the kitchen table. She looked older than 16. There are burdens that children should never carry. This was one of them. I placed a plate of toast beside her. "You don't have to protect your parents anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know who to protect." That answer stayed with me, because Olivia had spent weeks trying to choose between loyalty and honesty. No child should ever face that choice. She took a deep breath. "Grandma, can I tell you everything?" I sat down. Everything. For nearly 2 hours, Olivia spoke. At first, the details came slowly. Then the words began pouring out. She told me that the money problems had started almost 2 years earlier. Michael had lost another marketing contract. Jennifer's hours had been reduced at work. Credit card balances increased. Arguments became common. Some nights, Olivia stayed in her room because she could hear them fighting downstairs. Her father worried constantly. Her mother blamed everyone else: the economy, employers, the government, friends with more money, family members who were more successful. According to Olivia, the word deserve appeared often. We deserve better. We deserve a break. We deserve some luck. The problem with believing you deserve something is that eventually you convince yourself you have the right to take it. One evening, several weeks before my collapse, Olivia overheard her parents talking in the kitchen. She remembered the conversation clearly. Jennifer had shown Michael an online fundraiser, someone else's family, someone else's illness, someone else's tragedy. According to Olivia, Jennifer said, "Look how much they raised." Michael replied, "People give money when they're emotional." At the time, Olivia thought nothing about it. But after my hospitalization, the conversations changed. Michael became obsessed with the campaign. He checked donations constantly. He read comments. He discussed numbers. And one particular sentence made Olivia cry while she repeated it to me. "Dad said this might be the answer." I sat quietly. The answer to what? Our problems. Hearing those words felt like another betrayal. Not because of the money, because somewhere inside his mind, I had stopped being his mother. I had become a solution, a financial opportunity, an answer. Olivia wiped her eyes. "He didn't talk about you being sick." What did he talk about? The money. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I thought about Michael sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand, looking worried, asking questions, taking photographs, all while considering donations. I asked carefully, "Did he ever seem guilty?" She hesitated. "At first." "What changed?" He said, "Everyone lies online." I closed my eyes, because that sentence explained more than I wanted to understand. If everyone lies, then lying becomes acceptable. If everyone cheats, then cheating becomes normal. If everyone manipulates people, then manipulating people no longer feels wrong. Michael had created his own moral permission. Olivia continued. "The money started coming in really fast." "Did they tell you how much?" She nodded. At first, Dad seemed shocked. And later, he became excited. That word hurt. Excited. Not relieved, not grateful. Excited. She described evenings when Michael refreshed donation totals every few minutes. Jennifer discussed how much debt they could repay. They talked about the SUV, the kitchen renovation, vacations they had postponed, even private school options for Olivia. All funded by a woman who wasn't dying. At one point, Olivia finally asked her father, "What if Grandma gets better?" Michael answered, "She already is." Olivia looked at me. I didn't understand. But I did. He already knew. From the very beginning. The campaign was never about saving my life. It was about saving his, or at least the life he wanted. Later that afternoon, Olivia asked if she could walk with me through the backyard. The weather had turned cool. Leaves covered the grass. The garden where I had collapsed stood nearly empty. She stopped beside the maple tree Thomas had planted years ago. "I was scared you'd hate me." I turned toward her. "Never." "I should have told you. You were protecting your family." She looked down. "But you are my family too." That sentence nearly broke my heart. Because she was right. Families become complicated when loyalty collides with truth. We sat on a bench near the garden. After several minutes, Olivia said something unexpected. "I don't think Dad is evil." I remained quiet. "He just got lost." Those words stayed with me, because anger had filled most of my thoughts since discovering the fundraiser. But Olivia saw something I had stopped seeing. Michael was still her father. The man who helped with homework. The man who attended soccer games. The man who made pancakes on Saturdays. People are rarely entirely good or entirely bad. Sometimes they simply make terrible decisions and continue making them because turning back feels impossible. I wanted to believe that. I desperately wanted to believe my son had simply lost his way. But another question remained. How far had he gone? That evening, Olivia helped me prepare dinner. As we cooked, she suddenly asked, "What are you going to do?" I looked at her. "I don't know yet." "Are you going to call the police?" The question surprised me. "No." "Are you going to tell everyone?" I stirred the soup quietly. "I don't know." She seemed relieved. "I don't want Dad to go to jail." Neither did I. Despite everything, despite the lies, despite the money, despite the humiliation, he was still my son. And that fact complicated everything. After dinner, Olivia showed me something on her phone, a screenshot. She had taken it weeks earlier. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed the spreadsheet. Donation estimates, projected totals, columns, numbers, notes. One line read, "Goal $200,000. Another read, "Update video after major increase." My hands began shaking. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was planning. Actual planning. Olivia looked terrified. "I shouldn't have looked." I stared at the screen. "No, sweetheart?" I could barely speak. "I'm glad you did." That night, after Olivia went to bed, I sat alone in Thomas's old chair. The screenshot rested beside me. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and for the first time I allowed myself to accept the truth completely. My son had not made one bad decision. He had made hundreds. Every update, every photograph, every donation, every lie, one after another. And somehow, the knowledge brought clarity, because now I understood that waiting for Michael to fix this himself was impossible. He had gone too far. He had built an entire future upon other people's compassion. And if I wanted to protect those people, I would have to act. But before I made any decision, there was something I needed to do. I wanted to meet the people who had believed my son, the people who had opened their wallets, the people who had prayed for me, the people whose kindness had been turned into profit. Because perhaps if I understood their sacrifices, I would finally understand what I needed to do next. And deep down, I already feared the answer. The following Monday, I began calling strangers. That sentence still sounds strange to me. For most of my life, I avoided bothering people. I hated telemarketing calls. I rarely answered unknown numbers. I certainly never imagined I would spend my retirement contacting people who had donated money because they believed I was dying. But after speaking with Olivia, I could no longer think only about Michael. I needed to understand the people behind those donations. The people my son had convinced. The people whose kindness had become a source of income. The fundraiser page contained hundreds of public comments. Some people had included email addresses. Others had written personal messages. A few had left phone numbers. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Perhaps forgiveness. Perhaps guidance. Perhaps the courage to do what I already knew was coming. Patricia sat beside me that morning. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." "Why?" I looked at the printed donor list. "Because they're real people." The first person I called was a woman named Margaret Ellis from Indiana. She answered after the third ring. "Hello." My hands trembled. "My name is Sandra Cooper." There was a long silence. Then she gasped. "Oh my goodness." She began crying immediately. "I've been praying for you every day." My throat tightened. "There's something I need to tell you." For the next 20 minutes, I explained everything. The hospital visit, the diagnosis, the fundraiser, the lies. Margaret remained quiet. Finally, she asked, "You don't have cancer?" "No." "And you're going to be okay?" "Yes." She started crying again, this time for a different reason. "My mother died from cancer." I closed my eyes. "I'm so sorry." She took a deep breath. "I donated $50. "Yes." "I don't want it back." The answer surprised me. "What?" "I gave it because I thought someone needed kindness." I felt tears filling my eyes. But I didn't. "Maybe you do." After we ended the call, I sat silently. Patricia touched my arm. "What happened?" "She forgave me." "Why?" "I don't know." But the next call was different. A man named Robert Jenkins answered. He lived in Kentucky. He was 73 years old, a retired Marine. He had donated $100. When I explained the situation, he became quiet. Then he said, "I lost my wife to lung cancer." "I'm sorry." "I saw your son's video." My chest tightened. He seemed sincere. I could hear the disappointment in his voice. I believed him. So did I. Several seconds passed. Then Robert said something I would never forget. "I don't care about the money." "What do you care about?" "The truth." Those words stayed with me because that was exactly what had disappeared from my family. Truth. The third conversation broke my heart. A woman named Carol answered. She lived in Arizona. She was 61, and she was currently receiving chemotherapy herself. When she heard my name, she sounded excited. "I've been praying for your treatment." I almost couldn't continue. My voice shook. "Carol, I need to tell you something." When I finished explaining, she remained silent for a very long time. Finally, she asked, "So you aren't sick?" "Not with cancer." I heard her begin crying softly. "I sent $500. My heart stopped. 500? She laughed bitterly. "I sold some jewelry." I covered my mouth, because suddenly the number on the fundraiser page became something else. Not dollars. Sacrifices. Carol continued speaking. "I know what cancer feels like. I'm sorry. I didn't want another woman to suffer alone." Tears rolled down my face. She had been fighting for her own life. Yet she gave away money because she believed I was fighting for mine. I apologized repeatedly. She interrupted me. "This isn't your fault." But it felt like my responsibility. That evening, I couldn't eat dinner. I sat in Thomas's old chair thinking about Carol, about Robert, about Margaret, their stories, their losses, their kindness. I finally understood something. Michael hadn't only taken money, he had taken trust. And trust is far more valuable. Over the next week, I spoke with many more donors: a retired teacher from Iowa, a widower from Texas, a nurse from Michigan, a church group from Pennsylvania. Each story seemed to carry its own burden. Many of them struggled financially. Some were grieving, some were ill, some were lonely. Yet all of them had opened their hearts, and almost every conversation ended with the same question: "Are you really okay?" I always answered yes. Then many of them cried. One afternoon, Patricia found me sitting alone. "You look exhausted." "I am." She sat beside me. "What have you learned?" I thought carefully. "That good people exist." And I stared out the window, and my son stole from them. Patricia didn't disagree, because by then the truth had become unavoidable. The final conversation that changed me happened with a widow named Eleanor. She was 78 years old. She lived alone in Nebraska. She had donated $300. When I asked why, she said, "My husband died 6 years ago. I'm sorry. I know what it feels like to sit beside a hospital bed." I couldn't speak. She continued, "When I saw your picture, I thought maybe I could help someone." Her voice trembled. "I receive a small pension." My chest tightened. "Eleanor," she interrupted me, "please don't feel guilty." But guilt had already settled inside me, because these people had trusted my family. They had trusted my name, my face, my illness. And although I had done nothing wrong, I could not separate myself from the pain Michael had caused. That night, I opened my retirement account. I reviewed my savings, my pension, my investments, the money Thomas and I had built over 40 years. Not because I was wealthy, because I was responsible. Patricia saw the papers spread across the table. Her face changed immediately. "No." I looked up. "What?" I know that look. I remained silent. She sat beside me. "You are not thinking what I think you're thinking." I folded my hands. They trusted me. They trusted Michael. My face was on that page. "Sandra, I can't keep their money." Her eyes widened. "It isn't your money." Exactly. That was the answer. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Michael's. It belonged to people who had given it for a dying woman, and that woman never existed. Patricia shook her head. "You can't repay $200,000. "I know. You'll destroy your retirement." "I know. You'll lose your security." I looked toward Thomas's photograph, and suddenly I heard his voice, the voice that had guided me for 42 years. "Do what's right, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." I turned back toward Patricia. "My son took their trust." My voice shook. "But I will not keep it." For the first time since discovering the fundraiser, my path became clear. Painful, expensive, possibly foolish, but clear. Somewhere in another part of the city, Michael was still living inside the lie he had created. He still believed the money belonged to him. He still believed time would solve everything. He still didn't understand what I had decided. Because at that kitchen table, surrounded by retirement papers and donor names, I made the choice that would change all of our lives. I was going to return every dollar. The morning after I decided to return the money, I woke up feeling older than I had in years. Not physically, emotionally. There is a kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you know the right thing to do, but also understand the cost of doing it. The sun had barely risen when I carried several boxes from my bedroom closet into the dining room. Patricia arrived an hour later. She stopped in the doorway. "Oh, Sandra." I looked up. I couldn't sleep. The boxes contained 42 years of marriage, Thomas's watch, his military medals, my mother's jewelry, old silver pieces, several antiques we had collected together, the crystal vase Thomas bought during our 25th anniversary trip. Memories. That was what they really were. Patricia sat down slowly. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Yes." She stared at the boxes. "You don't even know how much Michael spent." "I know enough. What if he still has some of it?" "He hasn't offered it." She didn't argue, because both of us understood something. If Michael had wanted to return the money, he would have done so already. Instead, the fundraiser remained online. The donations continued. The lies continued. And every day I waited meant another person might lose money. That afternoon, I visited my financial advisor. His name was Harold Simmons. Thomas and I had worked with him for nearly 20 years. When I explained my plan, he removed his glasses and simply stared at me. "You want to do what?" "I want to repay the donors." "Personally?" "Yes." He leaned back. "Sandra, the campaign raised nearly $200,000. "I know. You don't have that kind of liquid cash." "No." He reviewed my retirement accounts, my pension, my savings, my investments, my certificates, everything Thomas and I had built. After nearly an hour, he finally spoke. "If you liquidate certain assets, you could recover a large portion. A large portion isn't enough." He folded his hands. "You understand this could significantly change your retirement." "I understand." "You may need to sell assets." "I understand." "You may lose financial security." I looked directly at him. "What would you do?" He remained quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "My answer doesn't matter." "Why?" "Because I can already see you've made your decision." And he was right. The numbers frightened me, but the thought of keeping money that belonged to grieving strangers frightened me even more. Over the next several days, I began making difficult choices. I sold several antique pieces. I cashed part of an investment account. I withdrew savings that Thomas and I had intended for emergencies. Each signature felt painful. Each document represented years of careful planning. Yet strangely, I also felt peaceful. Because, for the first time since discovering the fundraiser, I was doing something, moving, acting, choosing. Meanwhile, Michael remained silent. No calls, no messages, no apologies. Olivia stayed in contact. She visited often. Sometimes she simply sat with me while I organized donor names. One evening she asked, "Grandma, are you really going to do it?" "Yes." "Why?" I looked at her carefully. "Because someone has to." She frowned. "But it wasn't your fault." I reached across the table. "Sometimes we clean up messes we didn't create." She thought about that. "Because we're family." I smiled sadly. "Sometimes because we're human." The donor list continued growing. Nearly 3,000 names, thousands of acts of kindness. I organized them into folders, amounts, addresses, notes, messages. Many had written personal stories. One woman donated in memory of her husband. A father donated because his daughter survived cancer. A church group donated after praying for me. The more I read, the more determined I became. Then Michael finally called. It happened on a Thursday evening. His voice sounded tense. Mom. Hello? I heard you've been talking to people. I remained silent. People have been contacting me. I'm sure they have. His breathing became heavier. Why are you doing this? I almost laughed. Why? The question itself felt unbelievable. Michael, why did you do it? That's not what I asked. No, it's exactly what you asked. He became frustrated. You don't understand how bad things are. Then tell me. Silence. Finally, he said, We owe money. How much? It doesn't matter. It matters if you used donated money. He lowered his voice. I'm trying to fix it. When? I'm working on it. How? No answer. I spoke calmly. I'm returning the money. The silence on the phone lasted several seconds. Then, what? I'm returning it. You can't. I can. Mom, you don't have that kind of money. I'll find it. His voice suddenly became emotional. You're going to destroy yourself because of this. I closed my eyes. No, Michael. My voice shook. You already tried to do that. He inhaled sharply. I said I was sorry. No, you explained. He said nothing. Those are different things. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I looked at Thomas's photograph. Neither did I. After the call ended, Patricia arrived. She immediately noticed my face. What happened? He knows. What did he say? That I'm making a mistake. She sat beside me. Maybe he's right. I looked at her. If I keep that money, what does it make me? She didn't answer, because she knew. The following weekend, I visited the storage unit Thomas and I had rented years earlier. Inside sat furniture we no longer used, old collectibles, boxes of memories. I walked slowly through the rows. Each object carried history, our history. I touched Thomas's workbench, his old fishing equipment, a cedar chest, the rocking chair where he once held Olivia. I began crying. Not because I wanted to sell these things, because I knew Thomas would tell me to. He always believed that money existed to serve people, never the other way around. As I stood there alone, I whispered, I hope I'm doing the right thing. The silence felt almost comforting. Later that evening, Olivia came to my house. She found me writing numbers at the dining table. She sat beside me. Are you scared? I smiled. Very. Then why keep going? I thought about the answer, about Eleanor, Carol, Robert, Margaret, thousands of strangers. Finally, I said, because they believed in me. She squeezed my hand. No. I looked at her. They believed in kindness. That sentence changed something inside me, because perhaps this story was no longer about Michael at all. Perhaps it was about protecting kindness itself, protecting trust, protecting generosity. If people become afraid to help one another, everyone loses. And that was something I could not allow. Late that night, after Olivia had gone home, I sat alone in the kitchen. Stacks of papers surrounded me. Donor lists, financial statements, retirement accounts, numbers, calculations, sacrifices. The cost would be enormous, perhaps more than I could truly afford. But another realization finally settled into my heart. Michael had spent months asking strangers to save his mother. Now, I was preparing to save something far more important: their faith in one another. And no matter how much it cost me, I had already decided every dollar would go back, even if it meant starting over at 67 years old. The first refund check I wrote was for $25. It belonged to Karen, the woman whose mother had died from cancer. I sat alone at my dining room table holding the pen for nearly 10 minutes before I signed my name. $25 was not a large amount of money, but the meaning behind it felt enormous. Because the moment my signature touched that check, everything became real. There was no turning back. I was no longer considering what to do. I was doing it. Patricia sat beside me. She watched me fold the check into an envelope. "Are you sure?" I smiled weakly. "No." She nodded. "Good. I was beginning to think you'd lost your mind." For the first time in weeks, I laughed. Then I pulled out a sheet of stationery, because I had decided that every check would include a letter. Not from Michael, not from a lawyer, from me. The first letter took nearly an hour to write. I wanted honesty, I wanted dignity, and most of all, I wanted the people who had trusted me to understand that at least one member of the Cooper family respected their kindness. The letter began, "Dear friend, my name is Sandra Cooper. You donated to an online fundraiser that claimed I was dying from cancer. I am writing to tell you personally that I do not have cancer. I was never diagnosed with terminal illness, and I only recently learned about the fundraiser that used my name and photographs." My hands trembled. I continued, "I cannot change the pain or confusion this may cause you. However, I can return your gift. Enclosed is a refund for your donation. Please accept my sincere apology for the deception that involved my family." At the end, I wrote, "Your kindness was real even if the story was not." When I finished reading it aloud, Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. "You're apologizing for something you didn't do." "Maybe. And if they refuse the money, then that's their choice." She looked down at the stack of envelopes. "How many of these thousands?" Her expression said everything. Thousands. Thousands of letters. Thousands of apologies. Thousands of reminders of what my son had done. The next morning, Olivia came over after school. She found me surrounded by envelopes. "Grandma, this looks like a post office." I smiled. "It feels like one." She picked up one of the letters. "Can I read it?" I hesitated. Then I nodded. She read silently. When she finished, her eyes had filled with tears. "You said sorry." "I needed to. But you didn't lie." I reached for her hand. "No, sweetheart." "Then why apologize?" "Because sometimes apologies are not about guilt. Sometimes they are about compassion." I explained that to her. She thought carefully before speaking. "I think Grandpa would be proud." Those words nearly broke me, because every decision I had made over the previous weeks had involved one question: what would Thomas do? And I already knew the answer. He would protect people, even strangers, especially strangers. During the following days, the letters began leaving my house in batches. 10, 20, 30 at a time. Some included small checks, others contained larger ones. $300, $500, $1,000. Each envelope carried part of my savings, part of my retirement, part of the future Thomas and I had planned. Yet strangely, I felt lighter, as though truth itself had weight, and every letter removed a little of it. Then the phone calls began. The first came from Karen. She had received her refund. Sandra. Yes. I got your letter. I waited. I'm sending the check back. I blinked. What? The money belongs to you. No, it doesn't. It does now. I smiled sadly. Karen, no. Her voice became firm. You told me the truth. I felt tears coming. Please use it for yourself. I can't. She sighed. Then give it to someone who actually needs it. After we hung up, I stared at the check she had returned, because for the first time I realized something. The donors were not angry. At least most of them weren't. They were disappointed, heartbroken, but many still wanted to help. The second call came from Robert, the retired Marine. He laughed softly. I got your letter. I'm glad. The refund cleared. I hope that helps. It does. I waited. Then he said, I've never met you. No, but you sound exactly like the kind of woman I thought I was helping. That sentence stayed with me all day. Meanwhile, Michael still had not visited. He had called twice. I didn't answer. Not because I hated him, because I wasn't ready. Olivia later told me that things at home had become tense. Michael and Jennifer argued constantly. Money, bills, the fundraiser, my letters, everything. According to Olivia, Jennifer blamed me. She's making us look like criminals. The statement hurt, because I wasn't exposing them. I was simply telling the truth. One afternoon, Patricia walked into my kitchen carrying a local newspaper. You're not going to like this. My stomach tightened. What? She showed me an online article. Someone had shared one of my letters on social media. The headline read, Woman returns donations raised through false cancer fundraiser. I sat down slowly. The story was spreading. A donor had posted my apology letter online. Thousands of people had already seen it. Comments filled the page. Many supported me. Many condemned Michael. Some called him a thief. Others called him desperate. I felt sick. Because this was exactly what I had hoped to avoid. Public humiliation. Not for myself. For my son. Patricia read several comments aloud. One person wrote, This mother has more integrity than most people. Another wrote, The son should be arrested. I closed my eyes. No. What? I don't want this. She sat beside me. You can't control it now. And she was right. Truth travels, especially after lies. That evening, my phone rang. Michael. This time I answered. His voice was shaking. What have you done? I told the truth. People are calling me. I remained silent. My employer found out. I swallowed. I'm sorry. No, you're not. His anger sounded mixed with fear. They think I'm a criminal. I wanted to tell him that actions have consequences. I wanted to remind him that thousands of strangers had been deceived. But instead, I simply asked, Michael, have you apologized to anyone? Silence. Have you? No. Why not? His voice became quiet. I don't know how. Neither did I. That was the tragedy. Because somewhere beneath the lies, the spending the excuses and the anger my son had become, trapped inside his own decisions. And now the walls were beginning to collapse. That night, after another stack of letters had been sealed, I sat alone beside the window. Snow had begun falling outside. The neighborhood looked peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not because things were improving, they weren't, but because honesty had finally entered the room. The letters were doing more than returning money. They were restoring trust. One envelope at a time, one conversation at a time, one truth at a time. And somewhere across the country, people were opening those letters, reading my words, holding their refund checks, learning that Sandra Cooper was alive, learning that kindness still mattered, learning that not every lie gets to keep its ending. The first reporter called on a Wednesday morning. I was watering the plants in my kitchen window when my phone rang. "Mrs. Cooper." "Yes." "My name is Rebecca Hayes with the Columbus Gazette." My stomach immediately tightened. "I was hoping to ask you a few questions." The article had spread much faster than I realized. Several donors had shared my refund letters online. One of them had posted a photograph of my handwritten note beside the refund check. Thousands of people had reacted. Comments multiplied. Shares increased. And now local newspapers had begun calling. "I don't think I want to talk," I said. "I understand," Rebecca replied gently. "But your story is becoming very public." Public. That word frightened me. Because for nearly 68 years, I had lived a very private life. I had worked quietly, loved quietly, grieved quietly. Now strangers were discussing my family. They debated whether Michael was a criminal, whether I was a victim, whether the donors should sue, whether the police should become involved. And somewhere in the middle of all those opinions sat my son. Still my son, no matter what he had done. "I don't want to hurt him," I said. There was silence. Then Rebecca asked, "Do you want to tell your own story?" That question stayed with me after we ended the call. Because perhaps the story no longer belonged to Michael. Perhaps it belonged to truth. Later that afternoon, Patricia arrived carrying groceries. "You look worried." The newspaper called. Her eyes widened. "Oh. I don't know what to do." She sat beside me. "You tell the truth." "I don't want Michael destroyed." Patricia looked directly at me. "Sandra, you didn't create this." I knew that. Yet mothers rarely separate themselves from their children's mistakes. Their pain becomes our pain. Their failures become our sleepless nights. Their consequences become our heartbreak. The following day, another reporter called. Then another. Television stations began sending messages. One local radio host discussed the fundraiser during his morning program. The story was spreading far beyond Columbus, and with every new article, the public response became stronger. Many people praised the refund letters. Many criticized Michael. Some demanded legal action. Others called him a fraud. Reading those comments felt like standing between two storms. Part of me wanted accountability. Part of me wanted mercy. Neither seemed possible. That evening, Olivia came over after school. She sat quietly at the kitchen table. "People are talking about Dad?" I nodded. "At school, too." My heart sank. "Are they being cruel?" She shrugged. "Some." I reached across the table. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "I just wish he had stopped." So did I. The next morning, Michael called. His voice sounded exhausted. "Mom?" "Hello?" "My company suspended me." I closed my eyes. What happened? "Someone sent them the article." I said nothing. "They think I lied to donors." The statement almost sounded absurd, because of course he had. Yet hearing his voice break still hurt me. I don't know what to do. For the first time in weeks, Michael sounded frightened, not defensive, not angry, frightened. Have you spoken to Jennifer? A long silence followed. We're fighting. What about Olivia? She barely talks to me. I heard him begin crying, very softly. I ruined everything. I wanted to comfort him, the same way I had comforted him after childhood disappointments, after heartbreaks, after failures. But this time was different, because this pain had victims, real victims, thousands of them. I finally asked, "Have you apologized to anyone?" "No." "Why?" "I don't know where to start." The truth was simple. You start with the people you hurt, but shame often makes simple things impossible. After we hung up, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Part of me wanted to drive to his house. Part of me wanted to protect him. But another part remembered Carol, the woman undergoing chemotherapy, Robert, Eleanor, Karen, all the people whose kindness had become money. Their pain mattered too. 3 days later, I agreed to speak with the Columbus Gazette. Only once. Only one interview. The reporter came to my home. She was younger than I expected. She brought a notebook. No cameras, no photographers. She asked gentle questions. About Thomas. About my illness. About the fundraiser. About Michael. And when she finally asked, "Are you angry with your son?" I didn't answer immediately, because anger had changed many times. Shock, hurt, disappointment, sadness, love, grief. Finally, I said, "I think my son became lost." She wrote quietly, "Can you forgive him?" I looked toward Thomas's photograph. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She nodded. "Do you want him punished?" The answer came immediately. "No." "What do you want?" I thought about that for a very long time. Then I answered, "I want him to become the man his father raised." When the article appeared, it changed everything. The headline read, "Mother Returns Donations Raised Through False Cancer Story." But the article focused less on Michael and more on the donors. Their sacrifices, their kindness, their trust. People responded strongly. Letters arrived, cards, phone calls. Some included additional donations. Several people insisted that I keep the refunded money. Others asked me to donate it elsewhere. And then the consequences truly began. Michael lost clients. His freelance work disappeared. People withdrew projects. Several friends stopped speaking to him. Neighbors talked. Church members whispered. Jennifer became furious. According to Olivia, she blamed everyone. The newspapers, the donors, me, but never herself. One evening, Olivia arrived unexpectedly. She looked upset. "What happened?" She sat down. "Mom left." My heart stopped. "What?" She went to her sister's house. "Why?" "Dad and Mom had another fight." She began crying. "Dad was drinking." I felt cold. Because suddenly, the consequences were becoming larger than the fundraiser itself. The marriage, the family, the home. Everything was beginning to crack. Several days later, Michael appeared at my front door. I barely recognized him. His clothes looked wrinkled. His eyes were red. His beard had grown. He seemed smaller somehow, older. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I lost my job." I swallowed. "I'm sorry." He nodded. I know. He looked around the living room, at the familiar furniture, Thomas's photographs, the old clock. Everything stable, everything unchanged. Then he whispered, I don't know how I became this person. And for the first time since discovering the fundraiser, I believed he truly wanted the answer. Because the public had judged him. The community had rejected him. His work had disappeared. His marriage was breaking. But perhaps the worst punishment had finally arrived. He could no longer avoid seeing himself, and sometimes that is the hardest consequence of all. The winter after the newspaper article felt longer than any winter I could remember. Snow covered Columbus for weeks. The trees outside my kitchen window stood bare against the gray sky, and the neighborhood became quieter as people stayed indoors. The world seemed frozen. In many ways, so was my family. Jennifer had moved into her sister's house. Michael was alone. Olivia spent most of her time with me, and the home that once held birthday parties, Thanksgiving dinners, and Christmas mornings had become a place filled with silence. I didn't hear from Michael for nearly 2 weeks after he appeared at my front door. According to Olivia, he rarely left the house. He ignored phone calls. He stopped shaving. He slept on the living room couch because he couldn't sleep in his bedroom. The black SUV remained in the driveway. The same vehicle that had once represented success now looked like evidence. One evening, Olivia sat beside me while we folded laundry. Grandma, yes. I think Dad is drinking. My hands stopped moving. How much? She shrugged. I don't know. That answer frightened me, because uncertainty often means the truth is worse. She looked down. He keeps buying beer. Have you seen him drunk? She hesitated. Twice. I closed my eyes. Michael had never been a heavy drinker. Thomas rarely drank. Neither did I. But people often search for something to quiet shame. Alcohol can temporarily silence guilt. Unfortunately, it also amplifies it. Several days later, I received a call from Jennifer. It surprised me. She had not contacted me since our confrontation months earlier. Her voice sounded tired. Sandra. Hello? There was a long pause. I don't know what to do anymore. I sat down. Where are you? At my sister's. I waited. She began crying. Not dramatically, not loudly. Quiet tears, the kind that come after weeks of exhaustion. He won't listen to me. What happened? He sits in the house all day. I remained silent. He lost another client. I could hear frustration in her voice. And he keeps saying, everything is over. The woman who had once defended the fundraiser now sounded defeated. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, I didn't think this would happen. There it was, the truth. Not evil, not cruelty. Consequences they never imagined. What did you think would happen? I asked. She inhaled slowly. I thought we'd catch up. The answer stunned me. Catch up? With whom? The neighbors, friends, social media people with larger homes, more expensive vacations, better jobs. Jennifer continued. We were drowning. I understood that. Financial fear is real. Debt is real. Pressure is real. But none of those things had forced them to use my illness. Nothing had forced them to tell thousands of strangers I was dying. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked toward Thomas's photograph. Yet you did. She cried again. I know. When the conversation ended, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Because for the first time, Jennifer sounded less like a villain and more like someone standing in the ruins of her own decisions. That didn't erase what she had done, but it made it more human. A few days later, Olivia received a call from her father. She put it on speaker. His voice sounded weak. "Liv, Dad, would you come over?" She looked at me. I nodded. "I'll drive you." The house felt different the moment we entered. The curtains remained closed. Dishes sat in the sink. Several empty bottles stood beside the trash. Michael appeared thinner. His face looked pale. His clothes hung loosely. For a moment, I saw Thomas. Not physically, but emotionally. The same sadness in the eyes, the same exhaustion. Except Thomas had carried responsibility. Michael carried regret. Olivia hugged him. He began crying immediately. "I'm sorry." She held him. "I know." He looked at me. "I'm sorry too." I sat quietly, because apologies sometimes arrive before people fully understand what they are apologizing for. We spent nearly an hour talking, mostly about Olivia. School, Christmas, small things, normal things. But beneath every conversation sat the truth. Eventually, Michael spoke. "The bank called." My stomach tightened. "The car." He nodded. "They're taking it back." The SUV, the symbol of success, gone. "And the house?" He looked down. "We're behind." I suddenly remembered something Thomas once said. When you build your life on borrowed money, eventually someone comes to collect. For Michael, the collectors had arrived. Debt, loss, shame, consequences. As we prepared to leave, Michael stopped me at the door. "Mom." "Yes." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared." Those two words changed something inside me, because for months I had seen anger, excuses, defensiveness. Now I saw fear, real fear. The fear of losing everything. The fear of becoming the worst thing you've done. Several days later, Olivia moved into my house temporarily. Jennifer remained with her sister. Michael stayed alone. The separation felt unofficial, but everyone understood what it meant. One evening, Olivia found me sitting beside the fireplace. "Do you think they'll divorce?" I answered honestly. "I don't know." She stared at the flames. "I miss how things used to be." So did I. She leaned against my shoulder. "I miss Grandpa." That made me smile. So do I. He would know what to do. Perhaps. Or perhaps he would simply remind us that families are strongest when people tell the truth. A week later, Patricia visited. She brought soup and fresh bread, as always. She listened while I explained everything. The drinking, the separation, the financial problems, Michael losing work, Jennifer leaving, Olivia moving in. When I finished, she said quietly, "The house is falling down." I nodded. "Yes." Then she added, "Maybe that's necessary." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She folded her hands. "Sometimes people build lives that cannot survive truth." That sentence stayed with me, because Michael had built a life upon appearances, success, money, image. The fundraiser simply accelerated something already broken. Later that night, I walked through my quiet house. Olivia slept upstairs. Snow covered the yard. Thomas's chair sat beside the fireplace. And for the first time, I realized something. Michael had finally lost the thing he spent years trying to protect. His image, his appearance, his idea of success. Everything false had fallen away. And what remained was simply my son, scared, alone, ashamed, the man who once promised to take care of me, the man who no longer recognized himself. I stood beside the window and wondered whether this was the bottom, whether a person must lose everything before he becomes willing to change. And somewhere across town, in a quiet house, filled with debt, regret, and silence, my son sat alone. For the first time in many years, there was no money left to chase, no image left to protect, no lie left to tell, only the truth. And sometimes the truth feels like losing everything before it becomes the beginning of something new. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow melted from the sidewalks. The trees outside my house began growing small green leaves. The garden where I had collapsed months earlier started showing signs of life again. For the first time in a long while, the world seemed willing to move forward. I wasn't sure my family was ready. By March, I had returned thousands of dollars. Some donors kept their refunds. Others mailed the checks back. Several asked me to donate the money to cancer charities. A few wrote letters that I kept in a wooden box beside my bed. One woman wrote, "You restored my faith in people." Every time I read those words, I cried, because I had spent months believing that my son had destroyed something permanent. Yet kindness, I was learning, is remarkably difficult to kill. One Saturday morning, Michael called. His voice sounded different, calmer. "Mom?" "Yes." "I've stopped drinking." I remained quiet. 3 weeks. I looked out the kitchen window. "That's good." "I started counseling." This surprised me. "Really?" He laughed softly. "I think I need it." Perhaps that was the first truly honest sentence he had spoken in months. He continued, "I've been meeting with a therapist twice a week." I said nothing. "I wanted you to know." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, "Can I come over?" Part of me wanted to say no. Another part remembered the frightened man standing at my door weeks earlier. Yes. That afternoon, Michael arrived carrying nothing. No groceries, no excuses, no explanations. Only himself. He looked thinner. The beard was gone. The circles beneath his eyes remained. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. For several minutes, we simply drank coffee. Finally, he spoke. "I've been trying to understand what happened." I folded my hands. "Have you—" He nodded slowly. "My therapist says shame makes people dangerous." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He stared into his coffee. "I felt like a failure." The words came slowly. After losing work. After the debts. After watching everyone else succeed. I listened. Everywhere I looked, people seemed ahead of me. His voice trembled. Bigger houses, better jobs, better lives. He smiled bitterly. I felt like I was drowning. I remembered Jennifer saying they wanted to catch up. Perhaps that had been the poison all along. Comparison. Michael continued. "When you got sick, I became scared." "I understand that. But then people started donating." He swallowed. And suddenly, I felt relief. The honesty hurt, yet I appreciated it. Relief became hope. He looked up, and hope became greed. Neither of us spoke. because that sentence explained almost everything. The first donation felt like rescue. The 100th felt like opportunity. The 1,000th became entitlement. He wiped his eyes. I told myself I was protecting my family. Were you? He shook his head. No. He began crying, real tears, not the ones recorded on videos, not the ones shown to donors. These tears belonged only to him. I was protecting my pride. That sentence landed quietly between us, because pride had cost him almost everything: his marriage, his work, his reputation, his daughter's trust, perhaps even his relationship with me. After a while, he reached into his jacket. He placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a cashier's check. $42,000. I stared at it. What is this? I sold the SUV. My eyes widened. The rest, retirement accounts. You didn't have to. Yes. His voice became firm. I did. He looked directly at me. You shouldn't carry this alone. For several moments I couldn't speak, because this was the first true act of responsibility I had seen. No excuses, no blame, no self-pity, just accountability. I know it isn't enough. It's a beginning. He nodded. I've also started contacting donors. That surprised me. What? I've apologized to 73 people? How did they respond? He laughed sadly. Some yelled. I'm sure. Some hung up. I nodded. And some forgave me. His voice broke. I don't understand that. I did, because forgiveness often says more about the person offering it than the person receiving it. Later that evening, Olivia came home. When she saw her father sitting in the kitchen, she froze. Michael stood. Neither spoke. Then he said, I'm sorry. Her eyes filled immediately. I know. I lied to you. She nodded. I know. He began crying again. I don't expect you to forgive me. Olivia walked forward and hugged him. Both of them cried, and suddenly I realized something. The healing wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches, no music, no miracles, only honesty. And honesty, after months of lies, felt almost sacred. Several weeks later, Jennifer asked to meet me. We met at a small coffee shop. She looked exhausted. The confident woman I had confronted months earlier seemed gone. I filed for separation. I sat quietly. She stirred her coffee. I don't know if we'll reconcile. Do you want to? She thought carefully. I don't know who we became. Neither did I. She began crying. I kept telling myself everyone deserved more. She looked up. But we already had enough. That sentence stayed with me, because perhaps many people destroy their lives chasing enough. Enough money, enough status, enough success, without realizing they already possess the things that matter. Family, trust, love, peace. As spring continued, Michael slowly rebuilt his life. He found part-time work. He attended counseling. He met with donors. He stopped drinking. He spent time with Olivia. Nothing happened quickly. Healing rarely does. One afternoon, he stood beside me in the garden where I had collapsed. The flowers had returned. The maple trees were green again. He looked at the ground. If you hadn't gotten sick. I interrupted him. I wasn't sick. He smiled sadly. Right. Several seconds passed. Then he said, I think I needed to fall. I looked at my son, the same little boy who once chased fireflies in this backyard. The same young man who carried Olivia into the hospital when she was born. The same man who had lost himself. Perhaps he was right. Sometimes people fall because they stop paying attention. Sometimes they fall because life pushes them. And sometimes they fall because it is the only way they can finally see what matters. As the sun began setting over the garden, Michael spoke one final sentence. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. I looked at him carefully. That isn't the first job. He frowned. What is? I touched his arm. Become someone worth forgiving. And for the first time in many months, I saw something return to my son's eyes. Not confidence, not pride. Something far more valuable. Humility. The beginning of the man he still had time to become. The first real sign of change came in the form of silence. Not the painful silence that had filled my house after the scandal broke, but a different kind. A calmer silence. One that felt less like avoidance and more like reflection. Michael began showing up again, but not in the way he used to. He didn't come with excuses anymore. He didn't try to defend himself. He simply arrived, sat down, and listened. Sometimes he helped Olivia with homework at the kitchen table. Sometimes he fixed small things around the house without being asked. Sometimes he just sat on the porch and watched the wind move through the trees. But the most important change was this. He stopped trying to control the story. One afternoon, he arrived carrying a folded piece of paper. I want you to see something, he said. I took it cautiously. It was a list. Names, amounts, notes. At the top, written in his handwriting, were the words, Full Donor Accountability List. My heart tightened. What is this? I've been contacting everyone again. I looked at him. Why? Because saying sorry once wasn't enough. He pulled out a chair and sat. I'm meeting them, one by one. I'm telling them everything without excuses. I scanned the list, hundreds of names, many I recognized from my own letters. Some of them hate me, he said quietly. I didn't respond, but some of them didn't. That surprised me. He continued, a few told me they understand desperation. I looked up sharply. But they still wanted honesty. Silence filled the room. Then he added, I finally understand that. For the first time, there was no defensiveness in his voice, only recognition. Later that week, Olivia came home with news. Dad got a job, she said. I looked up from the stove. What kind? A support role at a nonprofit. I paused, helping families with medical bills. That struck me. Was it difficult to get? She nodded. He said they almost didn't hire him. I imagined why. But then Olivia added something else. He told them everything. I turned toward her. Everything. She nodded. The fundraiser, the mistakes, the letters, the money. I felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. Because honesty can heal, but it also exposes. That evening, Michael came over again. This time, he brought no papers, no lists, only a small envelope. He placed it on the table. I started paying people back directly, he said. My chest tightened. I thought the refunds were enough. They weren't. He looked down. I didn't just take money, Mom. He swallowed. I took their trust in humanity. That sentence stayed between us for a long time. Then he added, I can't return that. I nodded slowly. No, I said, you can't. His eyes filled. But I can try to rebuild it. The next day, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a donor named Eleanor. I had spoken to her months earlier. She had donated $300. She wrote, Dear Sandra, I received your refund. I want you to know something. I do not regret giving you that money. I gave it because I believed in helping a stranger. That belief hasn't changed. My hands trembled as I read. Please don't let what happened take away your ability to trust people again. I sat down slowly because I realized something I hadn't understood before. Michael had not only damaged his own life, he had shaken something much larger. The fragile belief that people are good. That belief was what Eleanor was trying to protect. And so was I. That night, I called Michael. I got a letter. From who? Eleanor. Silence. Then he said softly, I wrote to her last week. My heart tightened. What did she say? That she forgives me. I closed my eyes. And a pause. She said forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility. I smiled faintly. She sounds wise. He laughed quietly. She is. After the call ended, I sat for a long time thinking about forgiveness, about responsibility, about what rebuilding truly means. Not restoring what was lost, but becoming someone different because of it. A week later, Michael invited me to attend a small gathering at the nonprofit. Reluctantly, I agreed. The room was modest. No cameras, no speeches, just families who had received assistance. He stood at the front, nervous but steady. I used to think money could fix problems, he began. I watched him carefully. But I learned it can't fix trust. He paused. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. A quiet murmur in the room. I'm here to say I'm trying to earn it. Afterward, several people spoke to him. Some avoided eye contact. Some nodded politely. But one man approached him and said, You're lucky you're still trying. Michael didn't respond immediately. Then he said, I know. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he said, Do you think I'll ever stop paying for this? I kept my eyes on the road. Maybe not. He nodded slowly. But you won't be paying alone. That was the first time I saw him understand something deeper. That consequences don't end with punishment. They continue through repair, through effort, through time. When we arrived home, Olivia was waiting on the porch. She stood as we pulled in. Her expression was calm. I'm proud of you, she said to her father. Michael froze. Then he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone finally allowed to breathe after holding it for too long. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. Thomas's photograph rested on the mantel. I spoke softly to it. I think he's trying. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar. Not closure, not forgiveness, but acceptance. Because healing is not the absence of pain. It is the decision to keep moving forward despite it. The house was quiet in a way that no longer felt heavy. It felt settled. Not because everything was fixed, not because the past had been erased, but because for the first time in a long time, no one was running from it anymore. Spring had fully returned to Columbus. The air was softer now. The garden outside my kitchen window was green again, and the maple tree Thomas planted years ago had begun to grow stronger leaves than I had seen in seasons. Life, despite everything, continued. Michael came over every Sunday now, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because he said he needed to. He helped me fix things around the house, but more often than not, we simply sat together in silence. There was a new kind of understanding between us, fragile but real. The kind that only exists after something has broken and been slowly rebuilt with bare hands. Olivia usually sat between us. She was the bridge we didn't deserve, but desperately needed. One Sunday afternoon, as sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, Michael placed something on the table. It was a folder. Inside were printed emails, letters, receipts, and handwritten notes. "What is this?" I asked. "My accountability archive," he said quietly. Olivia glanced at him. "You made a system for it." He nodded. I needed to see everything in one place. I opened the folder. Inside were responses from donors, some forgiving, some still angry, some simply acknowledging receipt of his apologies. At the very back, I found something unexpected. A letter from Carol, the woman who had donated $500 while undergoing chemotherapy. My hands paused as I read. "Michael, I don't know if you will ever forgive yourself, but I want you to know something important. People make mistakes that break trust. What matters is what they do after." I looked up at him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The letter continued. "I lost my husband not just to illness, but to regret he never repaired. Don't become that man." Silence filled the room. Michael exhaled slowly. "I keep that one with me," he said. Olivia reached for his hand. "You're trying," she said. "I am," he replied. That was all. No grand declarations, no promises of perfection. Just effort. Real, imperfect effort. Later that week, something unexpected happened. A small nonprofit foundation contacted me. They had read the articles, seen the refund letters, followed the story, and they asked if I would speak at a community forum about trust, generosity, and accountability. At first, I refused. "I'm not a speaker," I told Patricia. "You don't have to be," she said. "You just have to be honest." So I agreed. The day of the forum, I stood behind a simple wooden podium in a small hall filled with people. Some donors were there, some journalists, some strangers who had followed the story online. Michael sat in the back row, Olivia beside him. I looked at them both before speaking. Then I began. "I never imagined I would be here," I said. "My life was quiet, ordinary. I preferred it that way." I paused. But sometimes life forces you into places you never asked to go. I told them about the fundraiser, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth. I told them about the donors, about Carol, about Robert, about Eleanor, about kindness given without expectation. And I told them about Michael. Not as a villain, not as a victim, but as a man who lost himself trying to survive. I spent a long time asking myself what this story was about. I said, money betrayal. Family. I looked down for a moment, but I think it's about something simpler. I looked up. Trust. The room was silent. Trust is not fragile because it is weak. I continued. It is fragile because it is powerful. It connects strangers. It creates hope. It builds communities out of nothing. I took a breath, and when it breaks, it doesn't just disappear. It scatters. It affects people who never even met each other. My voice softened. That's what I've been trying to repair. After I finished speaking, there was no applause at first, just silence. Then slowly, people stood. Not for me, not for Michael, but for something between us that had begun to heal. After the forum, a woman approached me. "I was one of the donors," she said. I nodded. "I know." She smiled gently. "I didn't want my money back. I know that too." She paused. "I'm glad you told the truth. That night we drove home together." No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Olivia said, "You did good, Grandma." I smiled faintly. "I just told the truth." Michael looked at the road. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. When we reached home, the porch light was on, warm, familiar. We stood there for a moment before going inside, and I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. This story had never truly been about a fundraiser, or money, or even betrayal. It had been about what happens after truth breaks through silence. Because silence can hide many things: pain, fear, shame, even survival. But it cannot rebuild what honesty can. As I stepped into my home, I looked at my family, no longer perfect, no longer untouched, but real, in a way we had never been before. And I understood then we were not who we used to be, but we were still becoming. And sometimes becoming is enough. After everything I've lived through, there is one thing I've learned more clearly than anything else. Truth doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it arrives through pain, through loss, through mistakes we can never fully undo. But when it finally comes, it gives us something we didn't have before: clarity. I used to believe that forgiveness meant going back to how things were. Now I understand something different. Forgiveness doesn't rebuild the past. It builds a new way forward, a way that accepts what was broken but refuses to stay broken forever. My son made choices that hurt many people. There is no denying that. And for a long time, I didn't know if our family could survive it. But I also saw something else: what happens when someone stops running from their mistakes. When they face them fully and painfully and begin the slow work of repair. That part matters too. Because redemption is not a moment. It is a process. It is showing up when it would be easier to disappear. It is telling the truth when silence feels safer. It is choosing accountability even when no one is forcing you to. And I won't pretend it has been easy. There are still days filled with regret. There are still conversations that feel heavy. There are still memories that hurt. But there are also small moments of healing. A shared meal, a quiet apology, a letter from someone we never met who chose kindness anyway. A granddaughter who still believes in love even after everything she has seen. Those moments matter more than I ever expected. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, I want to ask you something honestly. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done what I did: choose truth, even when it costs everything? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and they truly matter to me. And if this story moved you in any way, please like this video and subscribe. It helps me continue sharing these kinds of stories about family mistakes, and the long road back to healing. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. It reminds me that even across distance, we are still connected through shared human experiences. Thank you for being here with me until the very end.